asked 5 other storytellers to come here and join me in this studio and to develop a story in front of you. We put them in the chair right over there, put a microphone on them, turned on the lights, and started the camera. And then we didn't turn it off as they went through step after step, going through the 14 steps found in the art of storytelling. You saw them develop this story. After the 14th step, we asked several of them to go home that night, look at their story a little bit more, and then come back the next morning and tell it one more time. This time adding step 15. Step 15 is their own personal flair. Everyone has their own style. Everyone adds that little element that is just them and nobody else. Sit back and enjoy hearing these storytellers tell their story, adding their own personal flair.
Jimmy joyfully scrambled across the rocks heading toward the sandy beach. A misty rain fell from the gray sky above, and high up in the air, the seagulls cried, "Hoo, hoo, hoo." The ocean waves crashed against the shore. Pee, pee, pee. And as the water made its way through the rocks to once again join the vastness of the ocean, there was a haunting, whispering sound. Shwar, shwar, shwar. Jimmy loved the sharp clicking sound that his bright blue claws made as he ran across the stones, the rocks, as he headed toward the beach. He loved the salt air. He loved the squish of the sand, the wet sand between his toes. But then his mother stopped him. "Oh, Jimmy, Jimmy, son of mine, why do you always walk sideways like that? You should walk straight forward with your toes pointed out." The waves crashed against the shore. The seagulls cried in the sky. Shoo. And the rocks whispered, "Shwar." Jimmy thought, "I've always walked sideways. My mother and father have always walked sideways. My brothers and sisters have always walked sideways. My aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody I've ever known has always walked sideways." And so he said to his mother, Suki, mother of mine, please show me how to do that. I'd like to learn." Well, Jimmy's mother stood up straight and tried to walk forward. And she tried again and again and again, but she couldn't do it. She could only walk sideways, just like her son, just like every other crab she had ever known. Then Jimmy said, "Oh, Suki, mother of mine, you forgot to point your toes outward." The waves crashed against the shore. The seagulls cried up in the sky. and the rocks whispered, "Shwar." Jimmy's mother said, "Oh, Jimmy, Jimmy, son of mine, you are so clever. Of course that was the problem." She stood up as tall as she could, distributed her weight evenly through her 8 legs, pointed her toes outward, and fell flat on her face. She started to raise herself. Her face was crusted with wet sand. She started wiping it off, and a tear rolled down one of her eye stalks onto her cheek. And then she heard it. Whoo. Shwa. Bee. Whoo. Shwa. Bee. Whoo. Shwa. Be who you are. That mother crab raised herself to her full height, mustered as much dignity as she could, and said, "Oh, Jimmy, Jimmy, son of mine, I was wrong. Don't ever try to be someone you're not. Always, always be who you are."
The cat. The cat, that was the problem. All the mice met together, all with their pointy little nose and their rounded ears and their naked tails. They were old mice, young mice, men and women mice. They all came together to talk about the cat. What to do about the cat. So many of their companions had died at the claws of the cat. Oh, as they came together, they could smell the aroma from the kitchen, which made the issue even more important. Food. They had to get food, but every time they went out, there was the cat. Oh, they scraped out a meager living with that horrible cat. And the humans didn't help any either. Why, they made fun and encouraged the thing by calling the cat a great mouser. Oh, how horrible. What a horrible way to refer to any creature. As they sat around, they talked about the various ideas. Old Grandpa Mouse was there. He didn't say anything. He wanted to let the others talk. Oh, but he remembered his experiences with the cat. You remember how that day when he and his friend were out, ignoring the warnings about going too far out, and sure enough, it's like the cat could see in the dark, like he could hear a little mouse from clear across the house, and all of a sudden the cat appeared right there in the hallway. That's when they'd realized their mistake. They turned and they ran. He looked back and saw the cat didn't move. He just had that devilish cat smirk on his face, that smirk of confidence. They ran as fast as they could. And then, in a flash, in an instant, it didn't seem like one little hair on the cat even moved when suddenly he was there. The claw grabbed his friend. This gave him just enough time to dart into the hole, but the other claw came out and just barely scraped his body as he escaped. As he stood there in the meeting, he wore the scars of his battle in his body. The others were talking and clamoring about all the different ideas of how they could take care of the problem of the cat. Little grandson Mouse sat there. He was all excited about being in the meeting. He hadn't been allowed to be in a general meeting before, and here he was. Oh, he knew his job was just to stay quiet and let everyone else do the talking, but this was exciting to actually be here. He could see Grandpa off to the side and his mom and his dad and everything, and he sat there and he listened to all the ideas, and as he was listening to them, he suddenly knew the solution. It was so simple. It's so simple. And he waited for someone else to bring it up because he knew it was the obvious answer. And he was glad that no one did. Well, this would be his opportunity to give the idea. He would gain a new respect from all the mice. And so he stood up. Everyone stopped and looked at him. The moderator glared at him like, "What are you doing? You are not allowed to talk." Grandpa looked across and saw his grandson. Wondered what he's going to say. Little Mouse looked around. Every eye of the congregation was on him. Right? He never had that happen before, that everybody was looking at him. He stood up as tall as he could, put his chest out, and with his little squeaky mouse voice, he said, "The solution is so simple. It is so simple, and yet it will be a success. The answer to the problem is we need to put a bell on the cat. And then every time the cat comes around, we will know, we can hear our hearing. We may not be good at seeing, but we can hear, and we hear that little bell. We know the cat's coming near." Everyone thought, brilliant. Why hadn't they thought of that idea? This little mouse would take a... They just cheered. Little mouse. So obviously it was a good idea. And then he saw Grandpa standing up and walking to the front. To be honored by his grandpa was absolutely the best thing that could happen. He had a little mouse blush as Grandpa stood forward. Grandpa said, "My grandson's idea is truly brilliant. One little detail in the planning needs to be discussed. Exactly who is going to put the bell on the cat?" Well, every eye turned and looked at the little mouse. He only had the idea. One of the other more brave mice should actually put the bell on. He realized that nobody would do that. He moved back, got back to the side. Oh, how embarrassing. Grandpa had often told him that it's easy to come up with great ideas, but to implement those ideas are not always as easy. Across the room, Grandpa looked at his little grandson. He would mature, become old like himself. He just beamed with pride.
It's spring. The lush green grasses are covering the rolling hillsides. Daisies, daffodils, and bluebonnets are dotting the countryside. And with spring, we hear the sounds of a distant cowbell clanging away. We hear the rustling of a soft spring breeze going through the grass. And in the midst of this beauty, we hear zzz. It's spring. We have hordes of gnats. But today, oh no, today, one gnat will leave the swarm. One gnat will boldly, darely going where no other gnat has gone. He is going to leave the swarm. He will zip from flower to flower. He is going to zig and zag through the grass. And then a crest of air catches this gnat and raises him higher and higher and higher. And from this vantage point, he spies it. A bodacious Texas longhorn steer. Instantly, the little gnat knows what he needs to do. He saunters on over, approaches the bull, and very carefully lands on the tip of a horn. Oh, he anchors all 6 of his little feet on the side of that horn. He's ready for the ride. The bull leans down and goes after some soft spring grass, but it throws the gnat's body forward. He arches his back. He uses his antenna for leverage. He's like, yee-haw, ride 'em, cowboy. With that, the bull brings his head back up, but now it launches the gnat's body the other way, and he struggles to stay astride that beast. The bull turns his head to the right, turns his head to the left, the gnat's being thrown from side to side, but he digs his heels in for the ride. Victorious, he stays on for the full 8 seconds. Now, in a daring, bold feat, he launches himself from the horn and zooms away to safety. But our little friend the gnat, he's filled with that taste of victory. He has to come back one last time, right into the face of the bull. And he gets in front of that bull and he speaks. Hey! Hey! Quite a wild ride we had there, huh? And he's zigging and zagging around in front. The bull tries to focus on the gnat, kind of watching. But in a dizzying sense of defeat, the bull gives up, but the gnat goes on. I was victorious here. I'm just here to let you know I'm going to mosey on my way now, and I won't be bothering you anymore. And filled with that sense of pride, the gnat leaves and zooms away. The bull stands there for a few minutes, ruminating on what he's just heard. He goes back to eating his grass, realizing he's not going to be bugged by a problem that small. And that, Podnas, is the end of the story.
Gus was a dog, a very needy dog. You see, Gus lived a long time ago, about 100 years or so, back in a little western town. And back then, if you were a dog that didn't have a home, you were called a stray dog. And now Gus, well, he was a likable fella. He had long, silky hair and big brown eyes. Why, he could come up to the neighbor and give a little and bat his brown eyes, and while they go inside and try to find a little scrap of food to give to that dog. But Gus's favorite in the whole world was to go into town, because on Main Street was the butcher shop. Now, this wasn't like the butcher shop you see in your everyday supermarket today. No, this butcher shop hung the meat outside on great big meat hooks. I'm talking about great big old slabs of bison or deer. And as Gus would make his way down Main Street, he could smell that fresh meat. Well, as he came up to the butcher, old Joe would come out of the shop. Oh, old Joe. Old Joe, he stood about 6 foot tall. He had black, straggly hair and a big old bushy black beard and black, piercing eyes. He had on a white butcher apron, all smeared with, I don't know what. And hanging from one belt was his fillet knife. And in one hand he had his meat cleaver. And in the other hand he had his bone saw. Oh, he looked mighty scary indeed. But Joe had a big heart. And whenever he saw Gus coming, he said, "Come on over here, boy, come on. I got something special for you." Well, this one day, Gus came up the little steps and he went inside, and Gus came out with a soup bone. Gus had never seen anything like this before. This was a treasure. He took that soup bone in his mouth and he headed out of town. Because he wasn't going to share his soup bone with any of the other stray dogs. He made his way into the woods. He was running along when a crow that was up in the tree flew down. And the crow said, "Quack, can I have some of that meat?" And he looked at that crow and said, "No, it's mine. Mine, mine." And he went on his way, the crow following behind, saying to himself, my, aren't you a greedy Gus?" Well, he ran to about the middle of the forest when from up in a tree he saw a bobcat. That bobcat jumped down and said, "Meow, give me some of that meat." And Gus held on to that soup bone and said, "No, it's mine, mine, mine." And he kept on going, but behind him were that crow and that bobcat. And they said, my, what a greedy Gus." They ran on and on until he came to the edge of the forest. And out from behind a tree came a little bear cub. And that bear cub said, "Oh, can I have just a little bit of that meat on that soup bone?" And you know what he said. No, it's mine, mine, mine." And he ran out of the woods. Now Gus knew that if he could make it across the lake, the animals wouldn't follow him. There was a rickety old bridge that went across one of the inlets. He ran as fast as he could, clickety, 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 click across those boards until suddenly he stopped because some of the boards were missing. He stopped and he looked down. Why, down in that water was another dog. And boy, wasn't he a nice-looking dog with long flowing hair and great big old puppy eyes. But in his mouth was a soup bone bigger than his own. Now he was happy to have that soup bone, but he wanted something bigger. He wanted something better. And so he reared back on his hind legs and jumped up into the air. And as he did, as if in slow motion, his arms and tail flailed out in all directions. He looked down and could see that other dog staring back at him with that bone in his mouth when kersplasha! Gus went all the way down to the bottom of that lake, and that soup bone popped right out of his mouth and flew off in another direction, never to be found again. Now, Gus had never been in the lake water before. He didn't even know how to doggy paddle. And he kept flailing around and gasping for air until finally he made it to shore. And then he made himself get up out of that mud. And he started to get up toward the shore where he just laid himself down. The three animals came over and they looked at him. And they started to laugh. And they said, "Gus, you sure do look foolish." What were they talking about? He went back over to the lake and he looked down. Oh my goodness. His beautiful fur was all caked with mud. There was algae that was dripping off the top of his head. He looked downright foolish. And now he understood what his friends had known all along. If you're greedy, it makes you look mighty foolish. And that's the end of that story.